Welcome to Horrible Fates, where the most unexpected and tragic endings to seemingly ordinary lives are examined. We will take some time to explore the darkness that can lurk just beneath the surface of everyday existence. Hey everybody, quick reminder before we dive into the first story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Also, hit that like button. If we're able to get this video to 2,000 likes, I'm going to do a free merch store giveaway where one person who comments down below will win the drawing, and I will send you some free Cellar merch. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into the first story. Just south of Milwaukee, along the industrial edge of Lake Michigan, sits Oak Creek, Wisconsin, a city built between neighborhoods, highways, and the steady pulse of working machinery. It's the kind of place where thousands of people go to work every day inside facilities most of us never even notice. But in August of 2015, inside one of those buildings, a routine job would turn into something unthinkable. August 13th, 2015, Crothall Laundry Services Incorporated, located at 9905 South 13th Street, Oak Creek, Wisconsin. Crothall Laundry Services in Oak Creek wasn't the kind of place most people ever thought about. It sat just south of Milwaukee, near the interstate, processing massive amounts of medical linen for healthcare facilities. Inside, the work was built around movement. Conveyors, dryers, wash lines, and industrial systems designed to keep laundry flowing. Dryers run hot and heavy. Conveyors carry materials forward. Everything is designed for efficiency. But that same efficiency can become terrifying when human beings are placed too close to moving machinery without the proper protections. And the key issue in this case was hazardous energy. That term sounds technical, almost boring, but hazardous energy is exactly what it sounds like. It is the stored electrical, mechanical, or moving force inside a machine that can crush, pull, burn, trap, or kill someone if it is not properly controlled. That is why lockout-tagout procedures exist. Before a worker services dangerous equipment, the machine is supposed to be shut down, isolated, locked out, rendered inoperable, not just turned off, made incapable of moving. Because in a workplace like this, a machine that can still move is a machine that can still kill. Now, we don't know the worker's name from OSHA's public release. We don't know what he said that morning. We don't know what was waiting for him at home. We don't know whether he expected the task to take minutes or hours. None of this information was ever publicly released. But what we do know is this. He was 34 years old. He was servicing equipment, and while he was doing that work, the conveyor system moved. So let's try and picture the setting. The sound of machinery echoing through a large industrial laundry floor, metal frames, moving belts, the steady mechanical rhythm of a facility built to process huge amounts of laundry day after day. And then, something changes. A system that should have been made inoperable still has the ability to move. The conveyor belt engages, and in that horrible instant, the worker loses control of the space around him. As much as the man may want to, there is simply no time to negotiate with a machine, no time to reason with it, no time to explain that someone is there, working, vulnerable, and exposed. The conveyor doesn't have a conscience. It just does what it was built to do. It moves forward.
It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity, or remorse, or fear, and it absolutely will not stop. Ever.
And it carries the man with it, plunging him straight into the industrial dryer. Inside the ominous machine, he finds himself trapped within the danger zone itself. That is the part of this case that is so deeply disturbing. This wasn't a freak accident in the sense of something completely unknowable. OSHA later determined that the dryer's conveyor should have been made inoperable while the worker was servicing the equipment. In other words, the system should not have been able to move, but it did. And once it did, the worker was caught in a situation no person should ever have to face. He survived the initial incident, but only for a time. OSHA reported that he was severely injured on August 13, 2015. 2 weeks later, on August 27th, he died from those injuries. And that timeline matters, because this wasn't a death that ended the moment the machine moved. There were 14 days between the incident and his death. 14 days where the consequences of that moment continued. 14 days where a workplace failure became something permanent. Now, what happened inside that machine has not been publicly detailed in full. OSHA did not say that the dryer began a drying cycle, and it did not release a specific injury report. What investigators did say is that the conveyor system moved when it should have been disabled, propelled him into the industrial dryer, and left him trapped with injuries that were so severe that he died 2 weeks later. And after his death, OSHA opened an investigation into Crothall Laundry Services. What investigators found was not just one problem, it was a pattern of safety failures. OSHA cited the company for 6 serious violations. Inspectors found that energy isolating devices were not used on dryers and conveyors. They found that specific hazardous energy control procedures had not been developed for dryers and conveyors. They found that the company failed to inspect energy control procedures annually. They found that workers had not been trained on methods necessary for energy isolation, and OSHA also cited fall hazards on an elevated conveyor system and improper use of fiberglass ladders. To put that all in plain language, the safeguards meant to separate workers from deadly machinery were not where OSHA said they needed to be. The rules were not just paperwork, they were the barriers between a man and a machine, and on August 13, 2015, that protective barrier catastrophically failed. OSHA's Milwaukee area director, Christine Zortman, did not describe this as an unavoidable tragedy. She said that the man's death would easily have been prevented if Crothall Laundry had used procedures to stop the conveyor belt from operating while he was servicing the equipment. That statement is straightforward and blunt, and it is also devastating, because some tragedies happen in the shadows of uncertainty. Some leave behind questions that can never be answered. But this case left behind something else, a clear safety principle that should have been followed. Make the machine inoperable, control the hazardous energy, train the workers, inspect the procedures, do not allow a conveyor system to move while a person is servicing the equipment. It all sounds simple, but in industrial workplaces, simple rules are often written in the aftermath of terrible things, in the blood of everyday workers just trying to get by. Crothall Laundry Services was ultimately cited by OSHA and faced proposed penalties of $41,200. But no fine can reverse what happened. No citation can undo those 14 days. No press release can return a 34-year-old worker to the people who loved him. And that is what makes this case so haunting. Because from the outside, it may look like a simple industrial accident, a workplace violation, a line in an OSHA report. But inside that report is a human being. A man who went to work, a man who was doing a job, a man who, according to investigators, should have been protected by procedures designed specifically to prevent this kind of death. Instead, the machine did what it was designed to do, and once it did, everything changed. So when we talk about horrible fates, we often think of the strange, the rare, the almost unbelievable. But sometimes the most horrifying fate is not found in some remote location or unsolved mystery. Sometimes it happens under fluorescent lights, inside a place of business, surrounded by machines that everyone has learned to trust. And in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, in August of 2015, that is exactly what OSHA said happened. A conveyor system that should have been stopped carried a worker into an industrial dryer. He became trapped and fought for his life for 2 weeks after. And then, he was gone. Sometimes, the scariest thing about a machine isn't what it's designed to do, it's what happens when no one makes sure it can't do it to you.
festival visitors are going to be taken for a ride. Biggest portable scenic railway in the world, it's having its last check before the first test runs. 15 men will check every inch daily when the Big Dipper is open to the public. Whoosh! Stomach, where are you?
On May 30th, 1972, a group of children climbed into one of London's most popular roller coasters. The fairground was busy, laughter was in the air. The ride they were about to board was one they had been on before. For those children waiting in line, it probably felt like the safest kind of danger. A few seconds of excitement, a few seconds of fear, a rush of wind, then back to the platform to unload and discuss the experience. But on this day, the Big Dipper at Battersea Park would not complete its journey. Near the top of the first climb, the train stopped moving forward. Then slowly, at first, it began rolling backward. 31 people were on board the ride as a tragic disaster soon unfolded. The survivors would be forced to spend the rest of their lives asking how a day at the fairground could turn into one of the deadliest roller coaster disasters in history. This is Horrible Fates, the Battersea Park Big Dipper disaster. The Battersea Park disaster is a tragedy that, for decades, many survivors felt had been almost forgotten. Battersea Park is located in southwest London, not far from the River Thames. In the years after the Second World War, Britain was still rebuilding. Cities were scarred, families were trying to return to a normal life, and public attractions became symbols of escape, places where people could gather, laugh, and feel a tinge of hope for the future. In 1951, Battersea Park became part of that renewed spirit. As part of the Festival of Britain, a fun fair opened inside the park. It was not a small traveling carnival that appeared for a weekend and disappeared by Monday. Battersea Fun Fair became a permanent attraction. For many London families, it was a landmark, and towering above it all was the Big Dipper. The Big Dipper was a wooden roller coaster, large, noisy, and impossible to miss. To children and teenagers, it was thrilling. To parents, it was part of a normal day out. And by 1972, the ride had been operating for more than 2 decades. It was no longer new, it had carried thousands of riders, and it had become part of the fairground's core identity. On Tuesday, May 30th, 1972, the park was especially busy because it was half-term. A half-term is a short school holiday that occurs roughly halfway through a longer academic term. Most commonly used in the United Kingdom and other Commonwealth countries, these breaks typically last for 1 week and allow students and staff to recharge. Children were off school, teenagers were out with friends, families were moving from stall to stall, from ride to ride, through the noise and color of the fair. Among the children at the fair that day was 15-year-old Liz Haig-Reeve. It was her birthday, and she had come to Battersea Park with her friend, Alison Comerford. The two girls had already ridden the Big Dipper once. They enjoyed it so much that they asked to stay on and ride once again. It was the kind of decision that should have meant nothing in the moment. One more ride, one more laugh, one more lap around the track. But history often has a scary way of shifting itself around a seemingly ordinary choice. And that second ride would change everything. The Big Dipper was not the kind of modern steel roller coaster people are used to today. It was an older wooden coaster listed as a side friction, brakeman-operated ride, informally associated with the name Scenic Railway. That meant the ride depended heavily on its timber structure, its haulage system, and a human brakeman helping control the train. At Battersea, the first incline rose about 15 meters or roughly 50 feet above the fairground. By 1972, the ride had been operating there for more than 2 decades, and it had already survived a serious fire in 1970 that destroyed a large part of the structure and its trains. The coaster was rebuilt with replacement trains brought in from Dreamland, but at its core, it remained an aging wooden machine carrying children high above the park. The ride was initially built and used at a park in Southport back in 1922. Then, it was purchased and moved to Battersea Park. Over the 20-plus year run, numerous issues had transpired. On one occasion, a train car derailed, leaving riders stranded, and in 1968, a train car had unexpectedly rolled back into the station, causing injuries to a guest. The Big Dipper train had 3 wooden cars. On this run, there were 31 people on board. The riders soon settled into their seats. The train moved away from the station and entered the early part of the ride. For the first few moments, nothing seemed unusual. The train moved through the familiar route, into the darkness of a tunnel, around a bend, and then the train began climbing. This was the moment every rider knew. The slow pull upward, the pause before the drop. A roller coaster's first climb is supposed to build anticipation. It gives riders just enough time to look down, feel the height, and brace themselves for what comes next. But near the top of the incline, something went wrong. The train stopped moving forward. For a brief moment, some riders may not have understood what was happening. Liz Haig-Reeve later remembered thinking the driver might have been joking, maybe trying to scare them before the drop. But this was not part of the ride. The train had failed to continue over the top, and then, within a split second, it began to move backward. It was slow at first, but it wouldn't take long before gravity took over. The train began descending the lift hill in reverse, gathering speed with every fraction of a second. A rollback system should have stopped it. A brake should have caught it. Something should have prevented the train from racing backward down the track, but the train kept going. The brakeman reportedly tried desperately to stop it, but whatever braking system was supposed to protect those riders did not stop the train in time. The cars rushed backward down the incline toward a bend near the bottom of the track. A roller coaster train is designed to move through turns in one direction under specific forces at expected speeds. The train was now moving backward, out of control. At the bend, the rear carriage derailed. It left the track and smashed through part of the surrounding wooden structure. The remaining cars crashed into the pile of wreckage. Wood splintered, metal twisted, and children were thrown, crushed, and trapped. Within seconds, a normal day at the fair had become a disaster scene. The sound of the crash cut through the fairground. People nearby turned towards the Big Dipper. Parents began running. Fairground workers rushed towards the ride. Emergency services were immediately called. But for those trapped in the wreckage, the world had narrowed to broken timber, screams, and confusion. Some children were trapped high above the ground. Others were buried in debris. Some had survived the initial impact, but were still in terrible danger. One of the most heartbreaking details from the disaster concerns Allison Comerford. Allison had been riding with Liz Haig-Reeve. After the crash, Allison survived long enough to try to help her friend who was trapped in the wreckage. According to Liz's later account, Allison climbed out and began pulling debris away from her. But when Allison stepped onto a narrow wooden walkway beside the track, it collapsed, and Allison fell. Liz later estimated the fall at around 30 feet, and Allison would succumb to her injuries. It is one of the cruelest parts of the story. A child survived the crash itself, and then was fatally injured while trying to help someone she cared about. Emergency crews arrived to a scene of total chaos. The Big Dipper had not simply broken down or stopped, it had torn itself apart. Rescuers had to reach victims in damaged cars and unstable sections of the wooden structure. In the end, 5 children lost their lives. Their names were Allison Comerford, Thomas Harmer, Shirley Nash, Deborah Robertson, and David Sate. 13 others were injured. For the families, there was no warning, no time to prepare. Their children had gone to a fairground during a school break, something thousands of children had done before, but 5 of them would not come home. And for the survivors, the injuries were not only physical. Liz Haig-Reeve survived, but her birthday became tied forever to the death of her friend. She suffered a broken arm and a dislocated shoulder. Other survivors also faced serious injuries, hospital stays, and rehabilitation. But the emotional wounds were harder to see. Nightmares, guilt, fear. the memory of the train rolling backward, the sound of the crash, the sight of friends who had been alive only minutes earlier. At the time, many of the survivors were treated for visible injuries, broken bones, wounds, the damage that could be seen and measured, but the invisible damage remained. Years later, survivors would speak about trauma, anxiety, and the feeling that what happened at Battersea had never been properly remembered. For some, the disaster did not end when they left the hospital. It followed them into adulthood. After the disaster, investigators began asking the question that matters in every catastrophe: how could this happen? A roller coaster does not become deadly because of one dramatic moment alone. Disasters usually form quietly: a missed inspection, a worn component, a repair postponed, a warning ignored, a system that assumes nothing will go wrong because nothing has gone wrong yet. In the Battersea case, the basic sequence was clear. The train was being hauled up the incline, it failed near the top, it rolled backward, the rollback protection or braking system failed to stop it, and the train derailed. The first failure was the loss of forward motion. Some accounts describe the train becoming detached from its pulley or hauling system. Other accounts describe a rope snapping. Whatever the exact wording, the result was the same. The train did not crest the hill. The second failure was even more important. A roller coaster lift hill should include protection against rollback. If a train loses forward motion, there should be a mechanism to stop it from racing backward. But on May 30th, 1972, that protection did not save the riders. The train rolled back down the incline. Then, the third failure came at the curve. Moving backwards and out of control, the train entered a section of track it was never meant to take that way at that speed. The rear carriage derailed, and once that happened, the disaster was no longer only about the moving train, it became about the entire structure around it. Wooden barriers, walkways, supports, the ability of the ride to contain a failure, those systems also failed. Later reports found that the ride had a long list of faults. Different accounts give slightly different numbers. Some cite 51 faults, others say more than 50 or even 66. But the exact number is less important than what it reveals. This was not a clean, modern machine undone by one freak accident. The Big Dipper was an aging wooden roller coaster with serious safety problems. And when the wrong failure happened at the wrong moment, the ride had no margin for error left. There were reports that sections of the wooden structure were rotten, which lends itself to why Allison had fallen to her demise. There were also reports that the ride had experienced issues leading up to the incident, complaints of the brake lever not working correctly, and train cars getting stuck on the first hill. To add to the ride issues, the young staff often neglected their duties, with some paying little attention to what was going on. There was also talk that one of the managers was often drunk while at work. It's clear that safety was not something taken very seriously. The legal aftermath brought little comfort to the families. 2 men connected to the ride were ultimately tried and acquitted of manslaughter. Despite the deaths, despite the injuries, and despite the faults reported afterward, no one was convicted over this disaster. For many survivors and families, that outcome became another wound. Some had lost children, while some had lived through the crash, and yet, in the end, the law did not give them the kind of accountability they hoped for. The Battersea Big Dipper disaster did not instantly create one famous law with its name attached to it. There is no simple line that says, this crash happened, and the next day, the entire industry changed. Real safety history is usually more complicated than that, but Battersea became part of a larger reckoning. In Britain, the early 1970s were a turning point for workplace and public safety. Only 2 years after the crash, the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act of 1974 became one of the central pieces of UK safety legislation. It sets out the general legal duties that employers, employees, and the self-employed must follow to protect people from work-related hazards. Over time, fairgrounds and amusement parks became subject to more formal expectations around risk assessment, inspection, maintenance, operator responsibility, and independent examination. Modern UK guidance for fairgrounds and amusement parks now highlights that rides must be properly designed, operated, maintained, inspected, and managed by competent people who understand their legal duties. Today, amusement ride safety depends on layers: design standards, daily checks, maintenance records, trained operators, emergency procedures, independent inspections, and systems designed to assume that parts can fail because they do. That is one of the central lessons of Battersea. A thrill ride can never be built on trust alone. It must be built on redundancy, on maintenance, on documentation, on the understanding that when a machine carries children high into the air, every bolt, brake, cable, rail, and railing matters. For decades, survivors felt the disaster had been allowed to disappear. The fairground closed, the ride was dismantled, the land itself changed, and the place where 5 children lost their lives became ordinary again. But for those who were there, it was never ordinary. In 2022, on the 50th anniversary of the disaster, families and survivors gathered in Battersea Park to remember the children who were lost. A memorial tree was planted and a plaque was unveiled. It was a small act of remembrance, but for many, small act or not, it truly mattered. Because tragedies are not only remembered through laws and regulations, they are remembered through names. Alison Comerford, Thomas Harmer, Shirley Nash, Deborah Robertson, David Sate. 5 children who went to the fairground during half-term. 5 children who expected a ride to last only a few minutes. 5 children whose names should not be lost beneath the noise of history. The Battersea Big Dipper disaster is not just the story of a roller coaster that rolled backward. It is the story of what happens when age, maintenance, oversight, and assumption meet at the worst possible moment. It is the story of children failed by a machine they trusted, and it is a reminder that behind every safety rule, every inspection, and every locked gate around a closed ride, there is usually a reason. Sometimes that reason has a name, sometimes it has 5, and in Battersea Park on May 30th, 1972, those names became part of a tragedy that should never have been forgotten. In Santana, in the northern Brazilian state of Amapá, kite flying is a common sight. Especially during vacation periods and school breaks, the sky can fill with color. For many people, kites represent childhood. They are simple, cheap, fun, a piece of paper or plastic in the wind tied to a string held by someone on the ground. But in parts of Brazil, kite flying can also become something far more dangerous. See, some people take part in competitive kite fighting. The goal is not just to keep your kite in the air, but to cut down the kite strings of others. To do that, some kite strings are coated with a mixture known as cerol. Cerol is often made with glue and abrasive material. In some cases, reports describe substances like powdered glass, aluminum oxide, or quartz powder. The result is a line that can become sharp enough to cut skin, damage property, and seriously injure people who never even see it coming. For motorcyclists, the danger is especially serious. A person in a car is surrounded by metal and glass. A person walking may have a chance to see or feel the string before it tightens. But a motorcyclist is exposed, moving fast with the neck and upper body directly in the path of whatever crosses the road. On June 30th, 2026, 39-year-old Clausen Andrade Viana was riding his motorcycle through Santana. Clausen was a construction worker, a husband, and a father. His wife, Lenice Moreira, later described him as an exceptional man and a loving father. She said he had left for work that day in a great mood. He was happy, and he had even come home to visit for lunch. It was the kind of day that should have ended with him coming home like he always did. Instead, around 6:20 p.m. in the Paraiso neighborhood, Clausen ran into a horrible situation. Clausen on his motorcycle, made the familiar trip home. His motorcycle moved through the same neighborhoods he had passed through hundreds of times before. Clausen most likely never saw what was coming. He most likely never had a moment to react as a searing pain hit him around the neck. Clausen immediately stopped his motorcycle and sat down on the pavement. He grabbed at his neck, trying to find the source of the searing pain. He looked down at his hands and saw a frightening amount of blood. Nearby, witnesses tried to rush to his aid. They saw the string wrapped tightly around his neck, but when they tried to loosen it, they realized how razor-sharp and dangerous it was. Emergency services were called as Clausen desperately tried to stop the bleeding. The kite string had been coated in an abrasive material, and it had been pulled so tight that it was impossible to cut it free. To make matters more difficult, the scary amount of blood didn't help as it made everything slick. 30 minutes would go by before Clausen's body was forced to give up. The blood loss had been catastrophic. The efforts of Clausen and the people there trying to help him weren't enough to stop the blood loss. Following the tragedy, the public reaction was immediate and emotional.
You might not have heard of this in the US, but in Brazil, kite fighting has become so dangerous, the government is considering a nationwide ban. Yes, I said kite fighting.
The municipality of Santana issued a statement expressing solidarity with his family and friends, wishing them strength after what it called an irreparable loss. His wife, Lenice, spoke with grief and anger. She said their family had lost a father, a son, a brother, and a man who had been important to everyone around him. She also warned other parents about the danger of kite flying with these materials. She said she did not let her own son fly kites because she knew the dangers, and she urged other parents to take the same issue seriously. Clausen's mother called for justice, saying her son was a hard-working family man and that losing him had taken a piece of her heart. Police said vacation periods are a popular time for kite flying in public areas, and officials warn that there are restrictions against flying kites too close to electrical networks. But even with rules in place, dangerous lines still end up in public spaces. Authorities also urge motorcyclists to take preventative measures, including wearing helmets, higher collared shirts, and protective antennas on motorcycles. These antennas are designed to catch or deflect dangerous kite strings before they reach the rider's neck. But those warnings, they came too late for Clausen, and that is what makes this story so deeply unsettling. A kite is supposed to be harmless. It is one of the first things children learn to fly. It belongs in parks, open fields, and clear skies. But when that string is turned into something sharp, and when it crosses a road where people are moving at speed, it becomes a hidden weapon. To understand the full gravity of this story, in Brazil, kite strings have become a dangerous norm. There aren't official studies on how many deaths happen every year, but according to Brazilian trauma centers, they had 49 hospital admissions in one 4-month kiting season. It's also believed that upwards of 25 to 30 motorcyclists die each year in Brazil from sharpened kite strings, and there may be as many as 500 total accidents involving motorcyclists. To put this into perspective, my last video touched on a terrifying shark attack. The 25 to 30 annual motorcyclist deaths caused by razor-sharp kite strings in Brazil alone are 3 to 5 times higher than the total number of fatal shark attacks globally each year, which is just crazy to think about. You're far more likely to die from a kite string while riding around in Brazil than you are to be killed by a shark in the vast depths of the world's oceans. Clausen Andrade Viana did not leave home expecting danger. He was not walking into a dangerous factory. He was not stepping onto a questionable ride. He was not entering a known hazard zone. He was simply riding through his city, a normal commute on a normal road in a normal evening. And then, one thin line, almost invisible in the air, changed everything. In the early morning hours of February 27, 2026, Davis Square Station in Somerville, Massachusetts was just beginning to come alive. It was before the morning rush, the kind of hour where the city feels half awake. The lights are on, the station is open, and a few commuters are already moving through the platforms, heading to work, heading home, or heading toward whatever waited for them that day. One of those people was 40-year-old Stephen McCluskey. Stephen was from South Boston. He was a father of two. His family remembered him as someone who loved his children, loved being a dad, and had a gift for building things. He was the kind of person who could work with his hands, the kind of person who liked to talk, the kind of person whose life was far more than the few terrible minutes that would later define who he was on the news. It was around 5 a.m. when Stephen walked into Davis Square Station. As he had done numerous times before, he made his way towards the escalator and began riding it down. It was a moment that should have carried zero importance in Stephen's day. A normal ride down into a subway station, a few seconds on a moving staircase, like thousands of people do every day without even thinking about it. But as Stephen approached the bottom of the escalator, something went horribly wrong. The video surveillance footage I will now play showed Stephen losing his balance as he approached the bottom of the churning machine. Stephen then stumbled, fell, and ended up at the base of the moving escalator. At first glance, someone passing by might have thought he had simply fallen. Maybe they made an assumption that he was a drunk. Maybe they assumed he was sleeping. Maybe they just didn't want to get involved. But Stephen wasn't okay. He needed help. As the escalator kept moving beneath Stephen, his clothing reportedly became caught. The fabric was soon pulled tight, closing around his neck and restricting his airway. And the escalator just kept moving. For more than 20 minutes, Stephen remained trapped at the bottom. That detail is almost impossible to sit with. 20 minutes. Long enough for people to walk past. Long enough for someone to notice something wasn't right. Long enough for the scene to feel less like a sudden accident and more like a slow failure of everything around him. Surveillance video clearly shows more than a dozen commuters walking by. Some took the stairs, some appeared to stop briefly, but no one immediately hit the emergency stop button. The simple press of a button that could have saved Stephen was there at the top and bottom of the escalator. Those buttons are there for moments exactly like this, but for some reason, not a single person who surveyed the scene chose to get involved. It wasn't until about 22 minutes later that an MBTA worker responded and pressed the emergency stop. He called for help, but by the time first responders arrived, Stephen no longer had a pulse. Rescuers then had to work to free him from the escalator. Some reports say it took about 30 more minutes before he could be removed and taken to the hospital. Now, Stephen did not die at the station that morning. For 10 days, he remained alive after the incident, but the injuries were far too severe. He died later in the hospital, and when his family finally learned more about what happened, the pain became even harder to comprehend. This wasn't a tragedy that happened alone in the woods, or behind a locked door, or in some isolated corner where no one could have known. It happened in public, at a train station, on camera, with people walking right by. Stephen's mother, Mary Flaherty, asked the question that sits at the heart of the story: how could this happen in a busy train station and nobody stop? In the aftermath, the MBTA called it a terrible accident. Officials said anyone can stop an escalator in an emergency by pressing the red button labeled stop at the top or bottom, and then calling 911. The escalator was later inspected and reportedly returned to service without any mechanical issues being found. But the larger questions did not go away. Why did it take so long for anyone to act? Why did so many people pass by? Was there enough staff nearby? Was the incident reported properly to oversight agencies? And how many people even know they are allowed to hit an escalator stop button in an emergency? NBC 10 Boston later reported that the MBTA was directed to create a corrective action plan after failing to report Stephen's death to the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities in the way expected after an injury event that later becomes fatal. The agency also began public service announcements reminding riders about escalator emergency stop buttons. But for Stephen's family, none of that can bring him back. Weeks after the incident, people gathered outside Davis Square Station for a vigil. Around 50 people came together with candles, songs, flowers, and prayers. Some of them never even knew Stephen. They had only heard what had happened and felt they had to show up. Maybe because the story disturbed them, and maybe because they saw themselves in the people who walked by. Maybe because they wanted to prove that a stranger's life still mattered. Stephen's mother said she had lost faith in humanity after watching the video, but seeing people gather for her son helped restore some of it. This story is a haunting one. It is not only about an escalator, it is about the split second when a stranger needs help and everyone nearby decides whether to look closer or just look away. Stephen McCluskey's final tragedy happened in a public space surrounded by people. Any one of those people could have helped and could have potentially saved his life. And I won't lie, watching the video and covering a story like this really puts my faith in humanity into question. I can't help but think of one specific quote right now. Helping one person might not change the world, but it could change the world for one person. Now, before we continue with the next story, I want to quickly ask that you like the video and leave a comment down below. This single-handedly pushes the YouTube algorithm to share my video with more people like each and every one of you. Also, if you're not already subscribed and you enjoy what I do here, then please consider hitting that subscribe button. We just finally broke 40,000 subs, and I would love to hit 50,000 before the year's out. You can help the channel achieve this goal. Now, with that said, let's continue on to the next story. Tokyo Dome City Attractions sits in Bunkyo, Tokyo, right beside the famous Tokyo Dome. To visitors, it is a place of movement and noise. Roller coasters, bright signs, families, children, tourists, people looking up at rides, waiting in lines, and stepping into seats without ever thinking about the machinery beneath them. One of the rides there was called Flying Balloon. It was not known as an extreme thrill ride. It was a family-style attraction with 12 gondola-style seats arranged in a circle around a central pillar. The seats would rotate and rise into the air, reaching about 10 meters or a little over 30 feet. Every amusement ride, even the ones designed for kids, depends on powerful systems working exactly the way they should. Motors, supports, locking parts, moving structures, and before guests ever climb on, workers have to inspect those systems. On April 21, 2026, 24-year-old Hina Kamimura was one of those workers in charge of ride inspections. Hina was an employee of Tokyo Dome Corporation, and on that day, she was working on the flying balloon attraction during what has been described as routine or monthly maintenance. Reports say she was not alone. 5 colleagues were also involved in the inspection. As Hina and her colleagues began, the ride's seats were reportedly raised, which allowed the workers to access and inspect parts of the mechanism near the central pillar. Hina was believed to be on a stepladder near that central pillar. Now, this was the kind of task that happens behind the scenes at amusement parks everywhere. Guests usually never see it. They only see the final result, the ride operating, the lights flashing, and the seats moving smoothly. But at around 11:50 that morning, something suddenly went wrong. The raised seats reportedly descended. How or why is not clear, but Hina was still on the ladder near the central pillar. The seats lowered, and before Hina could do anything, she became trapped, sandwiched between the now lowered seats and the central pillar of the ride itself. It all happened extremely quickly. A simple, normal inspection had now turned the area into a dramatic rescue scene. The very same structure that lifted guests into the air now held a worker in a place where no one was supposed to be trapped. Police and fire officials were quick to respond. Her colleagues and rescuers were faced with a nightmare inside a machine that was never built to be taken apart quickly during a crisis. And this is one of the most painful parts of the story. Hina was reportedly trapped for about 5 hours. 5 hours inside an amusement park attraction, 5 hours while rescuers tried to free her, 5 hours while a place built for fun became silent around one desperate rescue effort. At around 5 p.m. that afternoon, Hina was finally freed and taken to the closest nearby hospital. But it was too late. Hina Kamimura was pronounced dead on arrival. Now, there's not a ton of detail around this story. It's unclear if she had been alive and conscious the entire 5 hours rescuers worked on the ride. Some have stated online that she may have been gone before rescuers even arrived, which in turn would explain why rescuers took their time freeing her from the ride. But there is also the sheer possibility that she may have been alive for minutes or for hours, trapped with the pressure of the mechanical seats weighing down on her. After the accident, Tokyo Dome Corporation issued a public statement. The company said that during routine maintenance work, one of its employees became trapped within the ride's gondola mechanism. After rescue operations, she was transported to a hospital where her death was confirmed. The company offered condolences and apologies to her family and also apologized to customers and others affected by the accident. All amusement rides at Tokyo Dome City attractions were suspended while the company said it would investigate the cause with police and fire officials and work on steps to prevent something like it from happening again. Refunds were offered to guests who had purchased tickets after the shutdown. But beyond the official statements, there is a deeper reality to the story. Amusement parks are built on trust. When people sit down in a ride, they trust that the restraint will hold. They trust that the track is safe. They trust the operator. They trust the inspections. But behind that trust are workers like Hina. People who climb into spaces guests never see. People who check bolts, mechanisms, movement, clearance, and safety systems. People who show up before the crowds, before the music, before the happy photos. They work around machines that can look playful from the outside, but can become deadly if something moves when it shouldn't. And that is why Hina's death is such a painful reminder. The danger wasn't on a wild roller coaster. It wasn't during a high-speed drop. It happened during maintenance on a family ride, the kind of attraction people might choose because it feels safer than other high-thrill rides. The flying balloon was meant to lift people gently above the park. Instead, on that day, it became the place where a young worker lost her life while just trying to do her job. When the lights went out across the park's rides, the silence left behind said more than any statement ever could. A place built for joy had become a place of mourning. Brooke Day was not someone who approached the snow-covered mountains carelessly. She was 22 years old and came from Queensland's Sunshine Coast in Australia. Friends, relatives, and former teammates remembered her as athletic, dependable, and safety-conscious. Brooke played Australian rules football for the Maroochydore Roos during both her junior and senior years. She also played rugby union with the Nambour Toads and had worked at the Alexandra Headland Surf Life Saving Club. Former colleagues remembered her for her kindness, humor, and the positive energy she brought into every room she entered. For Brooke, the act of snowboarding was not some new vacation hobby. Her family said she had been riding since she was 11 years old. By the winter of 2026, she was spending her 4th extended snow season in Japan and had previously worked at a physiotherapy business in the Hakuba region. She knew the environment, understood its risks, and had recently completed a 3-day avalanche rescue course. According to her parents, Brooke had already put that newfound training to positive use. She reportedly had helped rescue 4 people from what her family described as a life-threatening situation. Among the people who knew her, Brooke had earned herself a rather simple and straight-to-the-point nickname, the Safe One. Which brings us to the morning of Friday, January 30th, 2026. Brooke was snowboarding at Sigik Mountain Resort in the village of Otari in Japan's Nagano Prefecture. At approximately 9:02 that morning, she boarded the Sug No. 2 pair lift. Like many people entering mountain terrain, Brooke wore a backpack. Her family described it as an avalanche rescue backpack, equipment Brooke carried because conditions in the mountains can change quickly, and being prepared can sometimes mean the difference between life and death. Brooke wore the backpack to keep not only herself, but the people around her safe. As Brooke completed the ascent, the chair approached the upper station. Brooke began preparing to disembark. Attached to her backpack was a waist belt. In the present moment, the belt was not fastened around her body, leaving part of it loose and hanging freely. And at the end of that loose belt was a buckle. As Brooke moved away from the chair, that buckle became pinched or caught in part of the lift carriage. At the same time, the chest strap on Brooke's backpack remained securely fastened across her body. That combination would suddenly change everything. Had the backpack slipped freely from her shoulders, it might have remained with the chair while Brooke separated from it. But the chest strap kept the backpack connected to Brooke, and the loose waist buckle kept the backpack connected to the moving lift. Brooke attempted to free herself, but she was stuck to the lift. In a panic, Brooke found herself being pulled beyond the unloading area with the backpack still secured to her body. Later Japanese reporting, citing the Regional Bureau of the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism, said Brooke was carried approximately 17 meters or about 56 feet before the lift emergency stop was engaged. The chair came to rest with Brooke suspended approximately 8 meters or 26 feet above the ground. According to the regional authority, roughly 15 minutes or so passed before she was finally brought down. Resort employees began rescue efforts, and Brooke was swiftly taken from the mountain by ambulance. At that point, she appeared to be in cardiopulmonary arrest. The ambulance transported Brooke to Omachi General Hospital, where doctors and medical staff continued trying to save her life. Some early headlines in this story created confusion about exactly when Brooke passed on. She did not die at the resort that Friday. Her parents, Dean and Warren Day, traveled to Japan and were beside their daughter when she passed on in the hospital on Sunday morning, February 1st. They later said Brooke had passed peacefully with them at her side. Brooke's family thanked the friends who stayed with her, the people who rendered assistance at the mountain, and the hospital staff who did everything that they could. Her parents, sister Emma, and brother Kane then began the painful process of bringing Brooke back home to Australia. Which leaves the question, what caused her death? Well, the mechanical sequence of the accident is known. The loose buckle became caught in the lift chair, the chest strap prevented the backpack from separating from Brooke, and the moving chair pulled her beyond the unloading station. However, the precise underlying medical chain that caused Brooke's death has not been publicly detailed. Reports that she experienced cardiac arrest describe what happened to her heart, but cardiac arrest is not, by itself, an explanation of what produced it. It would therefore be irresponsible to state that Brooke died from strangulation, asphyxiation, or any other specific injury unless Japanese authorities or her family decide to release that information. What can be said with certainty is that she suffered critical injuries during the entanglement and died in the hospital 2 days later. Sugik Mountain Resort immediately closed the number 2 pair lift while police and transportation authorities investigated the matter. The lift remained closed for more than 2 months before reopening on April 15, 2026. Inspections were completed and the lift's safety systems were all functioning. The company also increased staffing at the upper station. Before Brooke's accident, 1 employee had been assigned to monitor that area. Afterward, the resort required at least 2 attendants. The spacing between the lift chairs was also increased, giving employees more time to observe each passenger, provide instructions, and make a decision to stop the lift. The resort also introduced a new rule for those with backpacks. Instead of wearing them on their backs, passengers were instructed to remove them and hold them against the front of their bodies while riding the chairlift. The company also installed additional English language warnings and pictograms, expanding multilingual safety announcements, and conducted renewed staff training in emergency stopping, first aid, and the early recognition of unusual passenger movements. Those changes reveal the brutal simplicity of the danger Brooke encountered. She was not defeated by some avalanche. She was not caught in some blizzard or stranded outside in sub-zero temperatures. She was not lost while recklessly traveling through unknown backcountry. She was caught during one of the most routine moments of a day on the mountain, stepping off a chairlift. And the object that trapped her was the object she carried because she wanted herself and the people around her to be safer. On the morning of August 23, 2024, the Jalan Masjid India district of Kuala Lumpur was already awake. The area is crowded with shops, hotels, restaurants, and pedestrians. It is the kind of city street where the surface appears permanent, pavement beneath thousands of feet, buildings on either side, and an underground network that most people never need to think about. Vijaya Lakshmi Gali was 48 years old and came from Kupam in the Indian state of Andhra Pradesh. She had traveled to Malaysia with members of her family for an extended visit lasting approximately 2 months. Reports said they were preparing to return home the following day. Later reporting in the case described Vijaya as her family's primary breadwinner. Her husband suffered from several health problems, including diabetes, heart disease, and impaired mobility. Her income and support helped keep the family functioning. Her adult son, Surya, spoke of how central his mother was to his life. He struggled with the one detail that continues to torment him to this day, and that's the fact that his mother had never seen it coming. That morning, Vijaya was walking near the Masjid India shopping district, reportedly heading towards a nearby temple and planning to get breakfast. At 8:22 a.m., surveillance footage captured the moment the walkway beneath her suddenly failed. There was almost no warning. The section of the pavement folded inward. Vijaya dropped into an opening approximately 8 meters or 26 feet deep. People walking only a few steps away recoiled from the edge. Then, Vijaya was just gone. Another patron clung to what was left of the sidewalk and managed to get away safely. And beneath the ground, the opening did not end in an empty underground chamber. It connected to an active sewer environment beneath the city. Strong flowing water, debris, concrete, and confined pipes created the possibility that Vijaya had been carried away from the original collapse almost immediately. Kuala Lumpur's Fire and Rescue Department was notified through an emergency call at 8:22 a.m. Crews responded that morning, and excavators were used to enlarge the area around the opening, allowing rescuers to inspect beneath the pavement. Teams began examining 6 sewer manholes along a downstream route that eventually reached the Pantai Dalam sewage treatment facility. During the initial search, rescuers discovered Vijaya's footwear near the excavated area. Tragically, it would be the only physical trace of her they managed to recover. Over the following days, the search became increasingly complex. Crews used telescopic and remote cameras, tracker dogs, excavators, and ground-penetrating radar. They inspected the sewer network leading away from the sinkhole and searched the Ponte de Lam treatment plant where the system ended. A sewer jetting machine was sent through part of the underground route. Teams also attempted a technique known as flushing. Water was temporarily blocked inside sections of the sewer and then released, creating a strong current intended to dislodge debris or reveal a hidden obstruction. Rescue dogs and cameras indicated the possible presence of an obstruction farther inside the system. Investigators eventually identified a blockage approximately 44 meters from the sinkhole. The obstructed section was estimated to extend for about 15 meters inside the sewer line. If Vijaya had been carried away by the current, rescuers feared she might be somewhere behind it. Crews attempted to reduce and redirect the water so specialist divers could enter. These divers faced almost impossible conditions. The tunnel was narrow, visibility was extremely limited, hard debris and compacted material blocked the route, and the underground current was strong enough to endanger the rescuers themselves. In the end, the divers were unable to safely reach the obstruction. As the search entered its sixth day, another section of ground subsided approximately 50 meters from the original sinkhole. No one was injured in the second collapse, but authorities closed the road to vehicles and began examining the surrounding soil and utility systems. It was a warning that instability might not be limited to the single opening that had taken Vijaya. By the end of August, rescue personnel had spent more than a week searching beneath one of Kuala Lumpur's busiest districts. On August 31st, after 9 days of searching, authorities announced that the formal search and rescue operation would end. Other government agencies were expected to continue recovery-related work, but rescuers had been unable to find Vijaya or recover her remains. Any further attempts to send divers in could result in further loss of life, and no one wanted to further increase the overall tragedy. In October of 2025, Malaysia's Federal Territories Minister announced the findings of a government task force. Investigators concluded that the primary failure involved the structure of an underground sewer pipe. Chemical reactions had corroded and weakened the pipe, while instability in the surrounding soil contributed to the formation of a cavity beneath the pedestrian walkway. The task force rejected the theory that a shallow limestone cavern had directly caused the collapse. The limestone layer in that area was much deeper underground. The sidewalk above the cavity continued to look solid. Its tiles remained in place, pedestrians continued walking across it, but beneath that finished surface, the material supporting it was disappearing. To this day, Vijaya's body has never been found, leaving her family struggling to obtain an official death certificate. Without that document, even basic legal matters, inheritance, financial claims, and compensation were difficult to pursue. On May 6, 2026, Malaysian authorities finally issued Vijaya's death certificate, and her family's attorney said the document would allow them to begin formally seeking compensation from the authorities. By then, approximately 20 months had passed since she stepped onto that sidewalk. Vijaya's disappearance was not an isolated warning. Across Malaysia, sinkholes have become a growing public safety concern as unstable soil, underground water movement, and deteriorating pipes quietly weaken the ground beneath roads and sidewalks. Most collapses will never become tragedies like this one, but Vijaya's fate revealed how quickly an unseen failure beneath a busy city can turn an ordinary step into a point of no return. For the Mattingly family, February 20th, 2024 had been almost exactly what a family vacation was supposed to be. Jason and Therese Mattingly had traveled from Fort Wayne, Indiana to Lauderdale-by-the-Sea, Florida with their 2 children, 9-year-old Maddox and 7-year-old Sloan. Sloan Ella Mattingly was a first-grade student at Lafayette Meadows Elementary School. Her family talked about her love for gymnastics, dancing in the living room, inventing games and making cards and bracelets for other people. She loved babies, Taylor Swift, and finding ways to make the people around her feel included. Her brother Maddox was not simply a sibling. He was described as being her best friend and her hero. The pair's parents later called the two children each other's built-in best friends. It was a beautiful, sunny day, and the family chose to spend that beautiful day at the beach. Jason later described the day as being just about perfect. As midday faded into the afternoon, they were relaxing and beginning to pack things up to head out. Sloane's parents considered themselves unusually cautious. When they took their children to the beach, they thought about waves, currents, and water safety. They stayed close to Maddox and Sloane, but the danger that came for them was not the ever-present ocean. See, Maddox and Sloane had been digging together in the dry sand. The hole they dug eventually reached an estimated depth of between 4 and 5 feet. It was taller than Sloane's chest and deep enough that its unsupported walls were holding back a large mass of loose sand. As the kids played, it all happened in an instant. The walls inside the hole failed. Maddox was immediately buried to approximately his chest. He could still breathe, but his sister Sloane, well, she had disappeared completely beneath the surface. For context, dry sand does not usually fall as one solid piece. The grains begin to flow. When one section collapses, the sand behind it loses support and follows suit. The material fills any available space, including the spaces rescuers create while attempting to dig someone out. Sloane's parents were only steps away. Therese later struggled with that fact. They had been right there, yet the transition from children playing to a life-threatening emergency happened faster than they could stop it. Faster than they had any chance of seeing it coming. One moment there was a hole, the next moment Sloane was swallowed up beneath it. People all across the beach ran towards the family. Video taken by a bystander showed approximately 20 adults trying desperately to help. They dug with their hands and used plastic beach buckets to remove the sand, but the walls repeatedly collapsed inward. 2 people who called 911 identified themselves as nurses. One caller described an entire circle of people digging while no one could reach the little girl beneath them. Maddox was pulled out first. One of the nurses stayed with him while Therese returned to the hole and continued digging for Sloane. Lauderdale by the Sea did not have lifeguards stationed on that beach. The first Broward County Sheriff's deputies reached the scene approximately 4 minutes after the collapse. Firefighters and paramedics arrived moments later. Professional rescuers took over using shovels and boards. The boards were placed around the hole to stabilize its walls and reduce the amount of sand continuing to fall into the space. It was a smart tactic and helped rescuers finally find and reach Sloane. Sloane was pulled out of the sand, but she no longer had a pulse. Paramedics immediately began resuscitation, and she was rushed to a nearby hospital. Tragically, Sloane was pronounced deceased later on that afternoon. Maddox survived. But in the space of a few minutes, the 9-year-old who spent his entire life beside his younger sister had become an only child. Their parents later said they were arranging help for him as he attempted to understand what he had experienced. The emergency affected even the professionals who responded to the scene. The paramedics who treated the 2 children were relieved from the remainder of their shift because of the trauma endured during the rescue. Which now leads us to the big warning. Why are holes on beaches so dangerous? A bucket of sand does not feel threatening. But once enough sand begins moving, its combined weight can pin a person's arms and legs, prevent the chest from expanding normally, and make self-rescue almost impossible. As the trapped person struggles, additional grains can flow into the small spaces around the body. Removing sand from above can also cause unsupported material along the walls to slide inward, replacing what rescuers have just removed. Unlike an excavation at a construction site, a beach hole normally has no engineered slope, no reinforcement, and no one inspecting its walls. It exists in a place associated with relaxation and childhood play. That makes the hazard difficult to recognize. A medical review of fatal and non-fatal sandhole collapses described the risk as deceptive, specifically because these incidents happen in recreational environments that people do not normally consider dangerous. Sloane's precise official medical cause of death has not been publicly released. For that reason, the safest factual description is that she died after being completely buried in the collapsed hole and could not be revived. Following the incident, Sloane's parents began speaking publicly because they did not want another family to discover the danger in the same way. Therese explained that they had always thought about water safety at the beach. The possibility that dry sand could suddenly engulf one of their children had never crossed her mind. The family encouraged warnings, patrols, and wider public education about deep holes. Lauderdale by the Sea subsequently changed its beach rules. An ordinance adopted in June 2024 prohibited people from digging holes or trenches deeper than 18 inches. It also required holes to be completely filled before the person who created them left the area. Experts have offered an even simpler guideline. A beach hole should never be deeper than the knee of the smallest person in the group. In the end, no ordinance can reverse what happened on February 20th. Sloane's passing is a tragedy, and all we can do now is let it serve as a reminder, as a warning, so that this never happens again. Satnam Singh was a 31-year-old migrant worker from India living in the Agropontino, a broad agricultural region south of Rome. The area produces melons, kiwis, artichokes, and other fruits and vegetables sold throughout Italy and beyond. Much of that work is performed by migrants. Some have legal residency and employment contracts. Others exist in a shadow system where their ability to work, find housing, or remain in the country can be controlled by employers, middlemen, and illegal labor recruiters. In Italy, this system of illegal recruitment and exploitation is commonly known as caporalato. Workers can be paid below legal wages, denied breaks, placed in unsafe environments, and threatened with dismissal or deportation if they complain. Satnam had no residence permit and no legal employment contract. Reporting after the incident said he earned approximately €5 an hour during long days in the field. His lack of legal status did not make the work any less real, and it did not make the machinery he used any less dangerous, and it certainly did not make his life less valuable. It simply made him easier to exploit. On Monday, June 17, 2024, Satnam was working on agricultural land near Cisterna di Latina. The work involved a roller-style machine towed by a tractor and used in the laying or wrapping of agricultural plastic. At some point during the operation, Satnam became caught in the equipment. As he struggled to free himself, pure horror occurred. The machine severed his right arm, which is bad enough in itself, but it also inflicted severe crushing injuries to his legs. The injury was absolutely catastrophic, but according to the forensic findings that emerged later, it was not necessarily unsurvivable. It's what happened after the machine was stopped that became the central issue in a homicide prosecution. According to Italian prosecutors, the man overseeing the farm, Antonello Lovato, did not immediately call emergency services. Instead, Satnam was placed into a van and driven away from the farm. He was taken to the place where he lived and left outside, bleeding and gravely injured. His severed arm was placed into a plastic crate normally used for collecting fruit and vegetables and was simply left sitting beside him. Soni, Satnam's partner, pleaded for help. A neighbor later recalled hearing her shouting for anyone to call an ambulance. The neighbor made the call. An emergency crews arrived and attempted to stabilize Satnam. Because of the seriousness of his condition, he was transported by helicopter to San Camillo Hospital in Rome. He remained alive for approximately 2 days, but on June 19, 2024, Satnam Singh passed away. A forensic examination after the incident determined that Satnam had died from massive blood loss. According to the statement released by prosecutors, medical experts concluded that he most likely would have survived if emergency treatment had been obtained promptly. And that finding changed the legal meaning of this entire case. Investigators were no longer looking only at how Satnam became entangled in the machine. They were examining whether someone had seen the severity of his injuries and understood that he could die and consciously failed to obtain immediate medical help. The question was no longer limited to whether workplace safety rules had been broken. It was whether the delay in treatment amounted to homicide. Descriptions of Satnam being left outside his home with his arm in a crate spread all across Italy like wildfire. Farm workers and trade unions organized demonstrations. Italy's president, Sergio Mattarella, condemned the cruel exploitation and inhumane conditions experienced by agricultural workers. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni called the treatment of Satnam barbaric and said it should be severely punished. The case also forced attention onto the labor system surrounding him. Statistics show that illegal employment was substantially more common in Italian agriculture than across the country's overall workforce. Trade unions argued that migrant laborers were routinely underpaid and exposed to unsafe working conditions while being too frightened or economically dependent to speak out. For many of those workers, Satnam's death was not viewed as a single isolated incident. It was seen as the most extreme result of a system in which a person could be treated as disposable. Italian police eventually arrested Annatello Lovato on July 2, 2024. Prosecutors initially considered a manslaughter case, but the accusation was upgraded to intentional homicide under the Italian legal doctrine of dolo eventuale, generally translated as eventual intent. That legal theory did not provide prosecutors to prove that Lovato planned the machinery accident or began the day intending to kill Satnam. Instead, they argued that Lovato understood how desperately Satnam needed medical treatment, recognized that delaying help could cause his death, and accepted that risk anyway. Lovato's trial opened in Latina on April 1, 2025. He denied wanting Satnam to die. Speaking in court, Lovato said he had lost his head after seeing the severity of the injury and was not himself at the time. His defense argued that the case should be treated as an aggravated workplace safety offense and negligent homicide, not intentional murder. Italy's largest trade union confederation, CGIL, joined the proceedings as a civil complainant. Outside the courthouse, agricultural workers gathered to demand not only justice for Satnam, but changes to the employment system that had left thousands of workers vulnerable. Recently, on July 8, 2026, just over 2 years after Satnam's death, the court convicted Antonello Lovato of intentional homicide with eventual intent. The court sentenced him to 16 years in prison. Prosecutors had requested a sentence of 22 years, but the judges recognized mitigating circumstances and imposed a lower term. The verdict was issued by a first-instance court. Lovato's attorney immediately announced that the defense intended to appeal. For that reason, the judgment is not yet 100% final, but I think the verdict still represents a significant legal conclusion. The court accepted the prosecution's central argument. The failure to obtain immediate medical help was not merely panic or any ordinary mistake after an accident. It amounted to the conscious acceptance of the risk that Satnam would die. Satnam's injuries began with the machine, but the machine could not decide whether to stop work. It could not decide whether to call an ambulance, and it could not decide whether to treat the bleeding man in front of it as someone worth saving. People, human beings, made those decisions. There was a period after the accident when a different decision probably would have allowed Satnam Singh to live. And that is what makes his fate so difficult to understand. He was not hidden inside a cave. He was not lost at sea. He was not beyond the reach of emergency medicine. He was alive. He was in front of other human beings. Help could have been called, but instead, he was discarded and left to fend for himself, and by the time help did arrive, precious time had already been lost. A chairlift, a sidewalk, a beach, and a farm. None of these places looked like the entrance to a death trap. And that is the disturbing thread connecting these 4 stories. Catastrophe did not announce itself. It hid inside a loose strap, beneath a finished pavement, within a wall of soft sand, and behind the decision of someone who failed to call for help. Remembering these people means remembering more than the final moments of their lives. Brooke Day was a safety-minded athlete who had already used her training to help others in the mountains. Vijaya Lakshmi Gali was a mother and breadwinner whose family continues seeking accountability without ever having recovered her remains. Sloan Mattingly was a joyful 7-year-old whose family transformed private grief into a warning for millions of other parents. And Satnam Singh was a worker whose death forced a country to confront the human cost of exploitation. Their lives were larger than the circumstances that ended them, but those circumstances leave behind lessons that should never be ignored. In the end, I want to send my deepest condolences to all the friends and family of those lost in today's stories. Thank you all for watching today's video. If you enjoy what I do here on the channel, I would love it if you liked the video and left a comment down below telling me your thoughts on today's stories. A simple like and comment can go a long way in helping YouTube push my video to more people. If you want to support the channel a little bit further, then consider becoming a channel member. You get your name here at the end of every video, along with some other perks, and it goes a long way in helping support the work I do. Also, if you want to check out my content in an audio-only format, you can find The Cellar on every major podcast location. Now with that all out of the way, I hope to see you all return next time, so you can join me as we head back into The Cellar.